In the early morning hours of September 26, 1918, the American Expeditionary Force set off on its greatest endeavor of the First World War, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. The battle, lasting 47 days until November 11th, would prove to be the bloodiest in American history. Many legends were born from the A.E.F's exploits, but none more memorable than the story of what became known as the Lost Battalion of the Argonne Forest. The offensive, led by American General Blackjack Pershing, called for the First Army to assault the German positions from the Argonne Forest in the north to the Meuse River in the south. Pershing called for his men to be aggressive and bring about a climactic victory that would end the war in Europe. Assigned to the far left, in front of the looming Argonne, was the 77th Division, under the command of General Robert Alexander. Alexander was a hard-driving officer who was determined to prove that his command could accomplish its objectives under his leadership. The men of the 77th Division could rest assured that their journey into the dark landscape of the Argonne would be one of continuous endurance and expected success. At 5:30 in the morning on September 26th, American and French artillery opened a 6-hour bombardment designed to soften the fortified German lines. As the earth rumbled, the American doughboys of the 77th steeled their nerves in anticipation of their journey over the top. Suddenly, the whistles blew, signaling to the doughboys it was time to move, and the 77th slammed forward that morning into a fog-shrouded, broken battlefield. The atrocious attack conditions fractured the individual units of the division, and it was 2 days before commanders were able to begin to tie the loose ends of their commands back together again. Fortunately for the doughboys, the Germans in the forest were not prepared for an attack on the scale launched by the A.E.F., and their lack of readiness proved to be the saving grace for the 77th. Yet, as soon as the 77th entered the Argonne, the situation became more cumbersome. Here, the tangled forest proved to be a menace to the command and control of the attacking Americans. This, coupled with the strong positions of the Germans, relatively untouched by the bombardment, brought the 77th's advance to a grinding halt. Here, the tangled forest proved to be a menace to the command and control of the attacking Americans. This, coupled with the strong positions of the Germans, relatively untouched by the bombardment, brought the 77th's advance to a grinding halt. Senior American command from Alexander up to Pershing was, of course, furious at the circumstances, and as a result they pushed an even greater aggression in taking the Argonne. Absolutely no A.E.F. units were to retreat or fall back, only a continuous advance until the job was done. This push for aggression would seal the fate of nearly 550 men in the 77th Division in what is perhaps the most dramatic moment of the Argonne, the story of the Lost Battalion. The United States, in order to achieve the required manpower necessary to support the Allies in France, instituted a draft to form National Army divisions. Much was riding on the performance of these drafted men, for they would make or break the American Army's capabilities on the Western Front. Arriving at Camp Upton on Long Island, the men predominantly from the rough neighborhoods of New York City and mostly of immigrant backgrounds were assigned to their new units. The division once filled was comprised of the 305th, 306th, 307th, and 308th Infantry Regiments, with additional support for the division coming from the 306th Machine Gun Battalion and the 152nd Field Artillery Brigade. The men learned all the rudiments of soldiering, and under the tutelage of French instructors, absorbed the complicated nature of trench warfare. Interestingly, the 77th Division did not receive much instruction on Pershing's concept of open warfare, which would serve as the guiding principle for their future in the Argonne. It was also here at Upton that officers like Charles Whittlesey, a New York lawyer and Plattsburgh officer graduate, found their lives transformed into one of military leadership and rigid discipline. Landing in France, the 77th Division was assigned to train with the British. Shortly after, they moved to the front lines, gaining valuable experience at the Baccarat sector, and in particular at the Battle of Chateau Thierry on July 18th. While here, they suffered significant casualties and began to receive replacements from the American Midwest, adding an even more diverse nature to a division that was already a melting pot of cultures. By September, the 77th, along with the rest of the First Army, were en route to their jump-off positions in front of the Argonne. Alexander's orders were as such. It is again impressed upon every officer and man of this command that ground once captured must under no circumstances be given up in the absence of direct, positive, and formal orders to do so emanating from these headquarters. Troops occupying ground must be supported against counterattack and at all gains held. It is a favorite trick of the Boche to spread confusion by calling out "retire" or "fall back." If in action any such command is heard, officers and men may be sure that this is given by the enemy. Whoever gives such a command is a traitor, and it is the duty of any officer or man who is loyal to his country and who hears such an order given to shoot the offender upon the spot. We are not going back, but forward. On September 28th, Major Whittlesey led his battalion forward once again. Whittlesey's battalion was the forward unit that day in the 308th Regiment, then the extreme left of the 77th line. During the course of the drive forward, the 1st Battalion of the 308th and the 2nd Battalion of the 308th under Major Kenneth P. Budd broke through the German rearguard line and advanced under competent and direct orders across a wide hill known as La Homme Morte. By the late afternoon, the little force of around 400 men took up a squared position along the wooded northern slope of the hill, dug in, and settled down in the rain-swept dark forest for the night. The position measured no more than 300 square meters, but was well outposted. Liaison parties sent out from the flanks discovered that the majority of the 2nd Battalion of the 308th Infantry had failed to keep up on the right, and that the liaison unit meant to connect the 77th with the French on their left, the 368th Infantry Regiment, had also failed to keep up. Nevertheless, Majors Whittlesey and Budd, following their orders to the letter, established a command post in a captured German bunker and waited for the morning when they were confident that their flanks would catch up. Pigeon messages were sent back to the 308th Regimental Headquarters alerting them to the situation, and a carrying party was sent out to fetch ammunition, food, and water, all of which the American force was very short of. By 2100 hours, all was quiet, and everyone was tense. During the night, elements of the German 122nd Infantry Regiment of the 2nd Landwehr Division, the rearguard force covering the general withdrawal in the area, slipped in behind La Homme Morte, fully cutting off the men of the 308th and eliminating at least 3 runner posts in the process. Unaware of the actual strength of the force that had penetrated their line, but believing it to be considerable, IR-122 set up machine gun posts behind the American bivouac and called for assistance. When the carrying party had not returned with supplies by the morning of the 29th, and with stray doughboys coming over the hill stating that the runner line had been cut during the night, Major Whittlesey decided to send out a scout party to investigate. Within a short time, messages came back from the party that confirmed the facts concerning the runner line. By that time, however, the small U.S. force was already under attack by machine guns, snipers, and at least 1 light trench mortar, taking fire from all 4 points of the compass. Concerned with the growing German pressure, Major Whittlesey decided to send out his battalion adjutant, Lieutenant Arthur McHugh, to try to break through the German line to the rear and lead up a rescue force. Lieutenant McHugh took 2 enlisted men with him and set off through the thick brush. In the distance, they could hear their comrades on the main line battling desperately to drive the line forward. By nightfall, all food was exhausted in the small pocket. A stream at the bottom of the hill was under fire from a German sniper, making precious water unattainable as well. German combat patrols nibbled the doughboy perimeter well into the night, but so far no serious attack had been mounted, although the doughboys were sure it would come. In order to prevent any panic, Majors Whittlesey and Budd kept the truth of the predicament from their men, telling only the few officers under them of the situation. Nevertheless, word leaked out. Soon, nearly everyone knew what was happening, and the tension on the La Homme Morte that night was intense as sporadic rifle and machine gun fire continued. Just after dawn on the morning of September 30th, outposts at the small pocket were surprised by a small squad of doughboys coming through the trees up the hill, dragging several German prisoners and a captured German machine gun. They were a scout party sent out from the main line to locate the bivouac of the 1st Battalion. Lieutenant McHugh and his 2 cohorts had, after several harrowing adventures, made it back through the lines earlier that morning and informed the 308th Regimental Headquarters of the situation. The incoming squad had run into only 1 German machine gun crew, whom they captured, and it now appeared that the Germans were in full retreat. Major Whittlesey sent the squad back down the way they had come, along with several of his own men to re-establish the runner line, and soon supplies were coming up the hill and the wounded were being carried back down it. After their rescue in the small pocket, the men of the 308th and their sister regiments did not have much time to rest. Major Kenneth Budd of the 2nd Battalion received a transfer, and he was replaced by Captain George McMurtry, a last-minute shuffle in command that would prove extraordinarily valuable in the coming days. General Alexander again cut orders to the 77th, this time to take Hill 198. By the night of October 2nd, after another long day of fighting, Major Whittlesey received information that the men had found a way up to the right of Hill 198. However, at around the same moment, the French experienced a massive counterattack by the Germans and were forced to fall back, exposing the left flank of the 308th. The same occurred on the right flank, with the other American division causing the 308th to be outflanked on both sides. Unfortunately for Whittlesey and his men, they did not discover this until shortly after they reached the peak of Hill 198. The hill was now under control. However, it was too quiet for Whittlesey. He realized that he could hear nothing of the 307th that was supposed to be on his flank. He recalled, either they had broken through the line as well and reached their objective over there, or they had been licked and fallen back. The former would be good news for the 308th. The latter, however, was unthinkable. Orders forbade it. While this was happening to the rear of the main action, George W. Quinn, a runner with the battalion, was killed while attempting to reach Major Whittlesey with a message from Whittlesey's adjutant, Lieutenant Arthur McHugh. Whittlesey, earlier in the day, had again sent McHugh back about 150 yards with 15 men and light machine guns to silence German machine gunners who had cut communications between Whittlesey's battalion and the American rear during the night. The Germans were taking ground from which they could surround Whittlesey's men. McHugh's undelivered message asked for a mortar to use against the strong German position. Quinn was found 4 months later to have killed 3 German soldiers who had mortally wounded him before he could reach Whittlesey. While universally known as the Lost Battalion, the men who made up this force on Hill 198 consisted of companies from 4 different battalions. These were companies A, B, and C of the 1st Battalion, 308, companies E, G, and H of the 2nd Battalion, 308, and Company K of the 3rd Battalion, 307th Infantry Regiment. Additionally, Companies C and D of the 306th Machine Gun Battalion were present, with a total strength of near 545 men, all under the command of Major Whittlesey, who was the most senior officer present. The men dug in on Hill 198, created what is known as the pocket. The 2 best companies were on the flanks with support from the weaker companies behind. A single company took up the front of the pocket. The rear was the least protected from an attack and was defended by only a few riflemen and several machine guns. The hill sloped steeply from the front of the pocket, making it difficult for the Germans to bomb the battalion from that direction. The biggest flaw in their position was that their holes were dug too close together, and too many men were occupying the holes at the same time. This created easy targets for mortars and snipers, and by about 11:30 that evening, Whittlesey realized that Hill 205 was still occupied by the Germans on the left, and the ravine to the right was also full of enemy soldiers. The morning of October 3rd was spent trying to re-establish contact with the flanks and the companies that were left behind. Whittlesey sent out runners to both the French and American units that were supposed to be there, but none of these returned. All were killed or captured by the enemy. The more time that passed without any messages, the more Whittlesey was coming to the conclusion that they were actually surrounded. However, the Germans were not attacking. The German forces within the ravine believed that they were outnumbered by the Americans instead. That all changed by the afternoon, though, when the Germans realized that they weren't outnumbered. Then they launched an attack from all sides. One doughboy remembered, "A single one up front may not have been so bad, but there were others on the flanks, and sniper fire ringing out as well." At about this time, Captain Nelson Holderman, a determined and hard-fighting officer commanding Company K of the 307th, then holding the right flank of the pocket, realized the predicament that the men were in. The German forces had nearly doubled and were closing in on them. Their communication line was cut, and so they could not receive supplies of food or ammunition. Holderman tried to lead an assault out through the back of the pocket, but failed to break it, incurring heavy casualties in the process. This infuriated Whittlesey, but seeing that there was nothing he could do, he simply sent the survivors back to their defensive positions. Next came a grenade assault, followed by mortars raining in on them, but the Americans did not stagger. Another attack came a little after 1700, and then it lasted for about 45 minutes. After this attack was over, the Germans began to settle down for the day. The Americans had suffered many casualties, but inflicted similarly heavy losses on the attacking Germans. While everyone in the pocket was certainly displaying bravery, there were several who stood above the rest. One of those was Captain George McMurtry, who was the epitome of professional leadership and iron courage in battle. He could be found everywhere throughout the pocket, always with a cool attitude and diligently directing and fighting alongside his men. Just as important, the captain served as a rock for Major Whittlesey throughout the encirclement, and although seriously wounded, McMurtry maintained his post, earning him the undying respect and confidence of the men trapped in the pocket. On the morning of October 4th, patrols were sent out on their morning routes, and Whittlesey was unsure that any of the carrier pigeons had actually made it through that he had previously sent. He was unsure if command actually knew of the desperate situation that was unfolding. Whittlesey believed that his orders to hold the position still applied, because the position was the key to breaking through the German lines. There has been much controversy among different historians regarding how it occurred, but Whittlesey and his men were shelled by their own artillery. Some believe that Whittlesey had relayed the wrong coordinates, while others believe that Whittlesey had gotten the coordinates right and the artillery's aim was off. However it happened, the truth was that they had advanced to the north slope of the Charleville ravine, while the artillery thought he was on the southern slope. Whittlesey released his final carrier pigeon, named Cherami, to call off the barrage. He remembered that a shell exploded directly below the bird, killing 5 of our men and stunning the pigeon so that it fluttered to the ground midway between the spring and the bridge we crossed to get into the pocket. As soon as the American shelling had stopped, the Germans launched an attack. After many losses and much hand-to-hand combat, the Germans were forced back once again. Although many of the lost battalion had been killed or captured, the unit remained intact, but morale was running low. Many men only had a few bullets left and no food. Bandages were being taken off the dead and reused on the wounded. A package was reported to have been dropped in for the men for resupply, but all reports point to it falling into German territory. Water was accessible, but getting it required exposing oneself to German fire. From the 5th to the 8th of October, the Germans continued to attack. They also sent messengers asking the 308 to surrender, but Whittlesey did not respond. There were many controversies at the time as to what he had done, but records indicate that he said and did nothing. At least one surrender demand carried by an 18-year-old soldier, captured by the Germans and then released to carry the message said, "The suffering of your wounded men can be heard over here in the German lines, and we are appealing to your humane sentiments to stop. Please treat the messenger as an honorable man. He is quite a soldier. We envy you." While the Lost Battalion tenaciously defended their position, their parent brigade, the 154th, and the entire 77th Division, under enormous pressure from General Alexander, launched a ferocious series of attacks to get them out. But with each attack, these efforts grew weaker and weaker as the combat power of the 77th ebbed. In the first 4 days of these attacks, the rest of the 308th Infantry Regiment alone lost 766 men. The news of the Lost Battalion's dilemma reached the highest levels of the A.E.F. command. Attempts were made to communicate, including messengers, telegraphs, and even aeroplanes, all to no avail. While the 77th's energy ground down, a powerful U.S. force from General Hunter Liggett's 1st Corps was being put together to assist the Lost Battalion. The veteran 28th Division was oriented to reach Whittlesey, and the fresh 82nd Division was moved to reinforce the 28th flank, adding more pressure on the Germans. Meanwhile, Pershing ordered Liggett to be reinforced by the 1st Division. Observing the movement of the 1st Division, the Germans ordered a Prussian Guards Division to reinforce their forces in that sector. The Germans also sent an elite battalion of stormtroopers reinforced with flamethrowers to aid the infantry in attacking Whittlesey. For the next few days, the pocket held firm. The powerful American attacks started to push the Germans back, and the 77th Division began trying to infiltrate troops into the pocket. Whittlesey, meanwhile, asked for a volunteer to sneak through the lines and lead back help. Private Abraham Krotoshinsky undertook this mission and skillfully left the pocket by a circuitous route to the north, which ultimately led to an infiltrating company of the 307th Regiment. Krotoshinsky acted as a guide to lead this group to help rescue the trapped company and establish a route for further fresh troops to come into the pocket. Thus, on October 8th, the 77th Relief Force had linked up with the Lost Battalion. The story of the Lost Battalion would become synonymous with the A.E.F. and the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Whittlesey and his command had become instant celebrities. The story of the Lost Battalion had captured the minds of not only the soldiers in France, but all of the United States. America needed heroes, and in 1919, while still on occupation duty, the survivors of the battalion were forced to go back to the Charleville Mill and film a silent movie in the same holes many of them had spent the entirety of the duration in during the action. Whittlesey would become the last casualty of the Lost Battalion in so many ways. Feeling enormous guilt from the struggle and the decisions that he made or did not make while in the pocket, Whittlesey ultimately took his own life a few years after the First World War. The horror of the 6 days spent in the pocket continue to capture the imagination and awe of all those who study it. How anyone could have endured such conditions is a testament to the bravery and determination of all the men who fought there. And while these men of the 77th Division started their military journey as mostly foreigners, both literally and figuratively, those that survived it all recognized themselves as Americans when they walked out.